You know, the first service this morning, I felt like I was preaching to the choir, and I'm kind of glad that the second service, I know that I will not be preaching to the choir. Now, that being said, I kind of feel like, maybe musicians or stand-up comedians or those kinds of folks who have an opening act, a warm-up act, and they're thinking, the warm-up act was really amazing. I wonder if I'm going to live up to those expectations. And it was really a blessing for me to be moved by the words of Michelle this morning and the story that she shared with us. So blessings for that gift. We gather this morning in the midst of the longest shutdown of our federal government in the history of the Union. We gather this morning holding the anger and disequilibrium of the feelings of powerlessness in the face of this one particular injustice. We gather knowing that hundreds of thousands of civil servants did not get paid on Friday. And as one of those servants told the Guardian newspaper on Friday, this shutdown is ruining people's lives. We gather with the knowledge that this shutdown is grounded in a rhetorical device used by the candidate who is now president to simply remember to share his anti-immigrant and hateful thoughts during rallies. We gather this morning wondering if the President of the United States is an agent of a foreign government. You, like I, may wonder if you have entered the world of the spy novel or movie. Wasn't this a plot from like a 1993 blockbuster in the theaters? And this is only one of the revelations amongst many, too numerous to enumerate, that keep me and maybe you in a state of disequilibrium. And now you look at the cover of your order of worship and you say, the preacher's come to tell you, don't go change it. Let's hope we're going to have some change. We gather this morning after some of us spent yesterday at the Unitarian congregation in San Jose to witness to the ordination of one amongst us, one amongst you of this congregation, the now Reverend Rodney Lemery. Reverend Lemery was ordained yesterday by 3 religious communities, including this one. In the history of Unitarianism, the call to ministry and the ordination and the installation was for someone who came from amongst the congregation, somebody who was a member of the congregation and came out. And so it was fitting that you were there together for the witness to his ordination. May he thrive, and may this congregation know that it has been integral to his formation as a minister, but of many others, all of those interns and other members who have found a call to their ministry within your midst. Myself, I came to Unitarian Universalism through another religious tradition. I grew up in the Anglican Church of Canada. One of the wonderful things about that for me was I got to be an acolyte. Now, some of you might know that as a server, or an altar boy, but I got the opportunity to be part of the worship service. My job was to get dressed up in a cassock, a black cassock, a long robe, and I remember it having a lot of buttons. You had to get down to almost on your knees to the floor and get all those buttons all the way to the top. And then once you had that, you got to put on a surplice, this pretty white vestment that went over top. And then I would have the opportunity to walk in with the Anglican priest to worship and get up onto the chancel. And then as we prepared for communion, which I have to admit now seemed to take forever, there were a lot of words in the Book of Common Prayer that we had to get through, even to get to the blessing of the wine and the wafers, etc. But I was there, in this case with him, all the way through that. But I hadn't been through my confirmation yet, so I couldn't participate in the communion itself. And that left me to wondering as a child, I wonder what it would be like to take communion. I wonder what that wine would taste like. And it was one morning that I went to the special room that only the minister and I got to go to put our vestments on. It was at the top of the stairs in this small parish in Penn, Saskatchewan. The minister had gone downstairs for the potluck lunch that was happening afterwards, and I was left on my own to take off my vestments and hang them up. And as I was hanging them up, to my surprise, there was a bottle of the communion wine in the closet. I thought, maybe this is my opportunity to see what that tastes like. But it was in this it was a jug. Okay, this wasn't a bottle, this was a jug of wine. It even had a handle that you put your finger through, right, in order to lift that up. And it was fairly full. We hadn't used a lot of it apparently, and something moved me, I don't know what, but to give it a try. So, I took off the cap, and I got my finger through, but I had to use the other hand to kind of lift that whole thing up. It was fairly heavy. And I put it to my lips and I tipped it up, and there was just this kind of like glug, this sploosh, and the sip that I got was more than my mouth could handle, right, and so it went down my white T-shirt, and so I was standing in that room thinking, I wonder what I will do to go to the potluck now that I have the communion wine across the front of my shirt. Well, I tell you, at that moment, I may have doubted the existence of God in my life before that, but at that moment, I was not a doubter. And I was imagining, wow, this God is a trickster, a vengeful God that would allow me to have the communion wine all over the front of my T-shirt. Well, I suppose, like politicians say these days, my sense of the sacred evolved. Right? I went through a period of time that I called my radical atheism, where I needed to, I thought, reject all that was my Christian upbringing, because I was changing, and that was something that I had to get rid of. I would go around, and I'd tell folks, I have a solstice tree. You may look like a Christmas tree. No, it's a solstice tree, because I didn't want to be connected in that sort of way. I thought I needed to throw out all that had meaning to me from that to change into who I thought I was becoming. Pema Chodron, a Buddhist practitioner and author, writes about that sense in this way. She says about meditation practice, and I think that this holds to my sense of change. She writes that meditation practice isn't about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It's about befriending who we already are. It's about befriending who we already are. So I needed to ask myself how, rather than in the change and the evolution that I was experiencing, rather than rejecting all that I was, how do I befriend that? It wasn't until I had the opportunity as a Unitarian Universalist to lead what we call Getting to Know You classes. We do them here, and they did it in the previous congregation, where I have the opportunity to ask folks who are visiting, who are considering Unitarian Universalism, to tell the group about their religious past, to think about their religious past. Where did they come from? And in that experience, I began to realize just the importance, the love that I had gained from being in the religious community that I was in my childhood. The gifts of that community were part of the call to continue to build religious community together in my own call to ministry. I was invited to, rather than reject all that was, to embrace and to celebrate that which had been, even as I changed and I evolved. Without that, I wouldn't have fallen in love with church. You know, Buddhist philosophy reminds us that there is constant change. For 1,500 years, two monumental statues of standing Buddhas stood watch over the Bamyan Valley in present-day Afghanistan. The Buddhas were hewn into the side of a sandstone cliff. The Bamyan Valley was on the famous Silk Route that made it possible for trading of goods to and from China and Western Asia through to Europe and back. A vibrant religious center was located in the valley, starting in the 6th century, with both Buddhists and Hindus founding monasteries in the region. One can only imagine what it would have been like to come over the rise on the Silk Road and see before you standing two Buddhas rising 180 feet above the valley floor. The land, which is, as I said, present-day Afghanistan, has been the heart of many cultures over the centuries. In the latter days of the 20th century, a group of religious people committed to a fundamental reading of Islam had came to rule Afghanistan with military power. The Taliban, as they were known and are known, held to an extremely strict and oppressive interpretation of the Quran and application of Sharia law. And in accordance with his interpretation of Sharia law that bans idol worship, a leader of the Taliban ordered the demolition of the Buddhas of the Bamyan Valley in March of 2001. And so after being pounded with artillery, the two statues were packed with dynamite and exploded onto the valley floor below. You see, after 1,500 years of standing watch over the Bamyan Valley, those two majestic Buddhas had become nothing but a pile of rubble on the valley floor. For me, there's a deep irony that in their religious zeal and intolerance to anything not of their faith or interpretation of their faith, the Taliban, in fact, affirmed an ancient truth that is central to the Buddhist philosophy that those statues stand for: the law of impermanence and change. Everything in the world and possibly the universe will pass through the same cycle of existence from birth to death. Buddhist philosophy suggests that the law of change applies equally to the human soul. There's no principle in us as individuals that is immortal or unchanging. For me, the only permanence that I have found is simply in the mystery of the universe, in the mystery of life itself. Some Buddhists would describe that mystery as namelessness, or the ultimate reality, which is simply beyond change. Some might refer to it simply as God. And yet, despite this knowledge, the change is going to come. Change is going to happen whether we like it or not. We like sometimes to say to each other, like the piano man has said, "Don't go changing to try to please me. I love you just the way you are. That was funny. When I was a teacher in the Saskatoon Open School, my students used to play this little trick on me because they needed to go down to the gym to change for the gym class, right? And they needed to go down there. And they would ask me earlier and earlier and earlier. Like, some it was like, I figured they needed 5 minutes, but, like 20 minutes before gym class, they'd come to me and say, Mr. Anderson, could we go change? I think it was because, it was good. They could go and they could have their thing and they could go change. And I would always say to them, they say, Mr. Anderson, can we go change? I said, don't go changing. Try to please me. I like you just the way you are. And they would roll their eyes. That's exactly what they would do. They would roll their eyes. I remember I was having a conversation with a congregant of this congregation. You might know Steve Falk. Steve has served for many years as a city manager. And we were talking about how we as people relate to where we live. And he had this wonderful theory. His theory was that we love the place we live most, the cities that we live, the year that we moved there. The year that we moved to the city, we think it is absolutely perfect. The streets seem to be perfectly paved, not a pothole in sight, right? The planning that was done before we got there is amazing. This city knows what it's doing. Now, not in his words, but in mine, the next year and the years to come, the city goes to hell in a handbasket, right? This is nothing like the city that I moved into. Everything has changed. And where are these people coming from? Gosh, clogging up the roads, making traffic horrible, taking my seats at the theater. This is just unacceptable. And as Steve was telling me the story, I was thinking, this sounds familiar. This is kind of like church. We join a church, and the year we join, it is perfect because we join it because it is. We join it because we love it, the way that it is when we arrive. And then guess what happens? It starts to change. Folks come, and they have an impact. New folks keep coming in because we have a message, right? We have a mission, and people want to join that. But that means that will change us. Octavia Butler, a science fiction writer that you may know, in the parable of the sower wrote, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change, and God is change. It's kind of like the flapping of the butterfly wings that we saw this morning. The sense that even in entering this room together, those who come will change us, and we will change. In about 45 minutes, you're going to have the opportunity in a congregational forum to again, as a congregation, be invited into change. You will hear a report from the Beloved Commitments Task Force about a racial bias assessment and how we as a congregation might be called to change and grow. But I want to let you know that, like I had to realize with my religious past, we don't have to throw away who we were, right? Because we wouldn't be here together if we didn't have that history. We're not throwing away, we're not becoming something else. We're just growing and changing to address the issues of now. So let us engage in that change together. It's a change that you have invited when you made a commitment to this document that you know as Make It So 2020. That invitation to being more than we are today does not mean that we throw away our past. We celebrate that as we grow and change together. It'll always be part of the story of who we are. Just want to close with some words by Adrienne Marie Brown, author and activist, and she helps me to understand this change that we're undergoing as well. She writes that how we live and grow and stay purposeful in the face of constant change actually does determine both the quality of our lives and the impact we can have when we move in action together. Many of us respond to change with fear, or we see it as a crisis. Some of us anticipate change with an almost titillating sense of stress. We spend precious time thinking about what has changed that we didn't or can't control, and or thinking ahead to future stress. I've been there, done that. Okay. So often this is because we aren't clearly committed about our dream destination. Let me read that again. Often this is because we aren't committed about our dream destination. So instead of moving toward anything in particular, we are in nonstop reaction. A first question to ask ourselves is, who do we practice increasing our ease with what is? Change happens. Change is definitely going to happen. No matter what we plan or expect or hope or set in place, we will adapt to that change, or we will become irrelevant. But this element is not about pure adaptation, which has led to every functional and dysfunctional condition we know. I am talking about the combination of adaptation with intention, wherein the orientation and movement towards life, towards longing, is made graceful in the act of adaptation. This is the process of changing while staying in touch with our deeper purpose and longing. And I will also add staying in touch and celebrating who we were and who we are becoming. So may we continue becoming, and may it be so. Blessed be, and amen.